Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. And thank you for joining this session. Today, I want to talk about something that's already changing student lives in a very real way, both here in the UK and in the Western world, as well as in South Asia and East Asia, and that is interactive AI. When people generally hear the phrase artificial intelligence, they sometimes still think of something a bit more futuristic or distant or experimental. But for students, it's not really any more just that situation. It is very woven into their day-to-day lives. Interactive AI, especially, is already part of the everyday academic life. Students are using it to search for explanations, break down difficult concepts, generate study plans, rehearse presentations, improve writing, summarize notes, and help them get started when they feel stuck on academic projects. So this session is not really about whether AI is coming into education. We're accepting the fact that AI is already within education. The more useful question is what it actually means for the sector, especially for university learning and for fairness, confidence, and even employability. There are definitely two very real ways and different ways to look at this shift. One is very alarmist. It says that students are using AI and therefore learning is collapsing, integrity may be under threat, and higher education may be losing control. That is one of the potential viewpoints. However, the other potential viewpoint, and the one that I like slightly more, is the optimistic and maybe even overly optimistic point of view. And this just says AI is just a brilliant support tool. Students are becoming more efficient, and this is simply progress. In reality, we're somewhere in the middle of these two points of view. It's never really that simple or one-sided. Interactive AI can absolutely help students. It can reduce the time spent staring at a blank page or being unproductive, and it can provide second explanations when needed when they haven't fully understood their subject teacher. It can also give students helpful amounts of practice in their subjects outside of normal teaching hours. It can be supportive, accessible, and confidence building, but can also make it easier to skip parts of the learning process that are essential and actually important. It can also help create overconfidence before entering the workforce and examinations, and it can encourage students to perform competence rather than building competence, and this is a big point. We do not need AI to blur the line between support and substitution. So the heart of this webinar is very simple. I'm not here to argue that students should never use AI. It's simply not very realistic and is probably not even desirable for both students and for universities. What I want to explore is how students can use interactive AI in ways that genuinely supports learning, rather than quietly weaken the very skills that universities are supposed to develop. Throughout this session, I will look at four main questions. Firstly, how widespread this shift is really. Secondly, how AI is changing the student workflow. Thirdly, what does it mean for fairness and integrity? And fourthly, what does responsible use look like if we want students in universities to have polished outputs and real capacity? So that with that in mind, let's firstly just have a look at the scale of the shift in this next slide. One of the most important things to understand is that this is no longer marginal behavior. This is not a small number of students experimenting at the edges or during edge cases. Interactive AI has moved much closer to becoming part of the mainstream student experience. And this matters because universities and institutions sometimes still discuss AI as if it's a policy issue first. Uh, and then an actual reality second. But for many students, it is the other way round. They're already encountering it in their daily routines. They're already deciding when to use it, how much to trust it, and how hidden or visible the use should be. So this creates a fairly important gap. Students can adopt a tool much faster than institutions can build a confident response around it. And we see this all the time when innovation takes over and overtakes and goes much faster than regulation. Universities may produce guidelines or policies or statements about acceptable use, but that does not automatically mean that students will feel well supported. Students can know that AI exists, can know that other students are using it, know that tutors are talking about it, and still not really understand what good, responsible, academically safe use looks like in practice. This is where things can get a little bit messy because when guidance lags behind behavior, students start forming their own set of rules that they work by. They learn from friends, from social media, from online videos, from trial and error, and from what appears to work for them. Some become very cautious and can avoid AI completely, therefore taking a hit in their productivity, even when there might be legitimate and useful ways to use it. And then others use it heavily, but without much reflection. Other students may sit in the middle, unsure where the line really is. So the inconsistency between how different students use AI really matters. It matters for learning because students may develop poor habits without realizing it. It matters for confidence because students may feel anxious when they're trying to act responsibly. And it matters for fairness because not all students are entering this space with the same digital confidence, the same access to tools, and the same clarity from their lecturers. There is also something slightly more cultural going on here. Once a tool becomes normalized in everyday study behavior, the conversation changes. It's no longer should we allow this, it becomes how do we shape the way that this is used? And this is what all academic leaders and university staff should be thinking. This is the more mature and useful question. Because whether we like it or not in the education space, students are increasingly treating AI like less of a novelty and more of a study companion. Not necessarily a perfect one, and certainly not a trustworthy one in every case, but an available one and a free or cheap one. It's there whenever you need it, it answers close to instantly, and it does not get tired, and its context now stays for very large threads. AI does not mind repeated questions, and it does not alienate students in their own mind for asking stupid questions. For a stressed student with high deadlines, these kind of things matter, and this is why AI provides such value for students. The shift we are dealing with is not just a technological shift, it's a behavioral one too. Students are building AI into rhythms of how they work. And once that happens, the challenge for universities is no longer simply control, it's educational design. It is helping students understand when AI helps and when it harms, and how to stay in charge of their own learning experience whilst using a tool that can so easily take over the process and help them miss out on key learning points. So this is leading us to our next point, which is that AI is not just changing final answers, it's changing the whole workflow and how students get to these outputs. So when many people think about AI in education, they go straight to the end product or the output. They imagine an essay, a report, a slide deck, or even a written response. And they ask, did the students write this or did the AI write this? But in my opinion, that question is far too narrow because interactive AI does not just affect the final output, it affects the process leading up to it. And it is this process that mostly matters in a university experience because this is how students learn and build habits. Students are using AI much earlier than we expect in the workflow. They use it to unpack a brief, to get examples of how concepts work, and to explain difficult reading in much simpler language. They also use it to generate revision questions, to organize notes, and to practice lightly interview questions. So the real transformation is not just in what gets submitted, it is in how students move from confusion to clarity, from first attempt to revision, and from idea to execution. Now, this all can be a very good thing. Learning often improves when students get feedback more quickly. And if a student is stuck and can ask for a simpler explanation straight away, that may help them stay engaged rather than give up. If they can generate 5 practice questions on a topic that they struggle with, that may encourage active recall. If they can rehearse a presentation answer aloud with an AI tool before speaking in front of others, that may build confidence. So I do not want to present the AI workflow change as automatically negative. That is simply not the case. In many cases, it can make learning more iterative, it can help students get unstuck faster, and it can reduce the amount of time wasted on uncertainty. And for students who are less confident about asking questions in class, it can provide a kind of low pressure space to explore. However, there is a catch, and it's a very important one. A faster workflow is not always a better learning process, as we all know. If AI is helping a student think, that is one thing. But if AI is replacing the student's need to think, that is something very different. And for example, let me explain. There's a big difference between a student writing a rough paragraph and asking AI to critique it, versus asking AI to produce a paragraph in the first place. There's a big difference between attempting a problem and using AI to understand where they went wrong, versus asking AI for the full worked answer before making any attempt. And there is also a big difference between using AI to rehearse ideas and using it to avoid wrestling with those ideas altogether. The distinction is crucial because struggle is not always a bad sign of learning. Sometimes struggle is where the thinking actually happens and the process is actually optimized. Sometimes the slow part is the part that builds skills within students. So if AI is removing all of the friction too early, the students may produce something cleaner and faster, but they may not actually be developing the understanding that universities are meant to cultivate. So the point that I would stress here is interactive AI does change the workflow, and that can be helpful, but it only remains educationally valuable if the student is still doing the real cognitive work. The question is not simply whether AI is present, the question is whether the student is still owning their own thinking process. Once we realize that, we can start to see why fairness and integrity conversations become much more complicated than it used to be. So one of the reasons AI has become such a difficult issue in higher education is because it does not fit neatly into older ideas of academic integrity. In the past, the conversation was often simpler. A student either did work themselves or copied work from someone else. Of course, there were gray areas, but the basic model felt clearer. Interactive AI disrupts this model because it can sit somewhere between help and authorship. It can suggest, reformulate, summarize, explain, prompt, restructure, and refine. That makes it harder to draw the lines between how much a student is owning their own work process compared to how it was before generative AI integrated into university life. And this is why I think fairness and integrity are now increasingly design problems, not just disciplinary problems. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the question is not only whether individual students behave well, it's also whether the educational system around them makes responsible behavior understandable and realistic. If one lecturer says AI is fine for planning but not for writing, another says avoid it completely, and another says use it as long as you declare it, students are dealing with mixed signals. If some modules assess process and others only assess polished outputs, students are dealing with mixed incentives. If some students can pay for stronger AI tools and others cannot, we can be dealing with an uneven advantage. If a university warns students not to misuse AI, but does not teach them what good use looks like, it leaves them navigating uncertainty on their own. So this is not just a moral issue, it is a design issue around about how university life is designed and how academic life and syllabi are surrounding students. And fairness matters here in at least two ways. The first is fairness in academic standards. Students need to know that grades still reflect meaningful capability rather than hidden dependence on tools. The second is fairness in access and supports. Not all students are starting from the same place. Some are more digitally confident, some are more cautious, and some are more likely to take risks because they are under pressure. Some have better access to technology, and some are on courses where AI is discussed openly, whilst others are not. So when institutions talk about fairness, it is not enough to talk only about catching misuse. They also would have to reduce ambiguity. They have to make expectations clearer. They have to help students understand acceptable use in a way that is practical and not just vague policy. I also think there is a danger uh, in talking as though all AI use is equally dishonest. That tends to shut down the nuance of this conversation. A student using AI to produce a whole assignment is not doing the same thing as a student using it to generate revision questions or ask for feedback on a paragraph they wrote themselves. If we flatten all of that into one category, we lose the ability to guide students properly through responsible and practical and productive AI use. So the challenge here is not to abandon standards, it's to modernize the conversation around academic standards. We need to move away from the simplistic question, did you use AI? And towards better questions such as, what role did AI play in your process? What were you thinking and what thinking did you do yourself? And can you defend and explain the work independently? Finally, we could also ask, would you be able to perform without the tool present? Those are much more useful questions because they get us closer to what education is supposed to protect, which is genuine learning, not just having polished outputs. So as we've talked about, AI can improve performance very quickly. It can make raps writing sound more confident, and it can give structure to messy ideas. It can also make notes feel more organized, and it can make someone seem more articulate than they currently are. But performance is not the same as learning, and that distinction matters because universities are not only supposed to be producing good-looking outputs, they are supposed to develop people who can think, reason, communicate, analyze, and adapt. A student may submit stronger looking work with AI support, but that does not necessarily mean they are becoming a stronger thinker. It may mean that they are borrowing fluency from a system, in this case, generative AI. Now, borrowing support is not always wrong. Universities already accept many forms of support. Students attend lectures, receive feedback, work with study groups, use spelling and grammar tools, and learn from examples. Support is normal. The question really is where support ends and substitution begins. If a student attempts a task, struggles with it, reflects on it, then uses AI to sharpen their understanding and improve their next attempt, that can still be very educational. But if they hand the key stages of interpretation, reasoning, structuring, and articulation over to the AI before they've really engaged in it themselves, then the educational value starts to thin out. And the danger is that this can be misleading both to the student and the institution. The student may feel more productive because they have produced something stronger, but later in an exam, in a Viva, or in a meeting or interview, the gap becomes visible. They realize they cannot explain the concept without assistance. they cannot reproduce the reasoning, and they cannot adapt the answer when challenged. In other words, they perform capability without fully building it. That is why I think one of the most useful distinctions we can make is between shortcut mode and learning mode when using AI. In shortcut mode, the student uses AI before making a serious attempt. It reduces the discomfort of not knowing, but it often does so by bypassing the very process that leads to student growth. In learning mode, the student attempts first, then uses AI to get explanation, critique, practice, and feedback, and then returns to the task more independently. The tool may be the same in both cases. In both cases, it may be generative AI, but the educational outcome is extremely different, and this is worth recognizing. So one of the key messages I would give to students is this. A stronger answer does not automatically mean you are becoming a stronger learner. The real test is whether you can still explain, defend, or apply the work without the tool doing the thinking for you. That is the standard that matters most, in my opinion, especially if we care about long-term development rather than just short-term polish. So after all that, what does responsible use actually look like in practice? I think students need something very concrete here because vague warnings are not especially helpful. So I would frame responsible use through 5 simple principles as we can see on this slide. The first is attempt first, and this is really important to skip shortcut use. Before asking AI to solve, structure, or explain everything, students should try to engage with the task themselves. Read the brief, write something rough, identify what is confusing, make the first attempt even if it's weak. That matters because it creates a base for learning. It means AI is responding to your thinking, not replacing the need for thinking. The second principle is asking for coaching and not completion. This is one of the most powerful shifts students can make. Rather than saying, write this for me, they should be asking things like, can you tell me what is weak about this paragraph? Can you ask me 3 questions that would help deepen this answer? Can you explain this concept in simpler language? Or can you quiz me on this topic? Those kinds of prompts keep students active. They use AI as a coach, critic, or rehearsal partner rather than a ghost writer. The third principle, and if you're in the workforce or you work beyond education or in academia in PhD research, this will be very familiar to you, and that is verify everything. AI can be convincing and wrong at the same time. It can hallucinate facts. It can produce false references, oversimplified explanations, invented claims, or biased framings. So students should never confuse speed with reliability. Anything factual, anything referenced to anything important should be checked. This is especially true in disciplines where precision matters, but really it applies everywhere. The fourth principle is be transparent. Students should get used to being honest about how they used AI, not only because some institutions require disclosure, but because it builds a better habit of professional responsibility. In many workplaces, people will be expected to explain how AI contributed to a piece of work. That kind of transparency is not just academic protection, it is employability preparation. And the fifth principle is, and this takes often a lot more work than students may have time for, but it's to remove the tool and test yourself. This one's really easy to forget, but it may be the most important. After using AI, can you still explain the idea on your own? Can you write about it without help? And can you answer the question verbally? If not, then there's a good chance that the tool helped you produce something but has not helped you own it. So responsible use is not about avoiding AI completely. It is about staying cognitively present when using it. It's about making sure the student remains the learner, the decision maker, and the person building the skill. Once students start to use it that way, the conversation becomes much more constructive because now we are not just talking about the risk, we are talking about better habits. So, at this point, it's worth stepping back and asking what all of this means beyond university. These students are not just using AI to get through assignments. Many of them are also thinking ahead. They're wondering what employers will expect, what skills will remain valuable, and what being good at AI tools will make them more employable. And the answer is yes. Yes, being good at AI tools will partially make them good and more employable. AI fluency is becoming useful. Knowing how to ask better questions, how to get useful outputs, how to verify information, and how to work with these tools intelligently will matter in many careers. Graduates that can use AI well will often be faster, more adaptable, and more efficient than those who cannot. But AI fluency alone is really not enough, because in the workplace, value rarely comes from using a tool in isolation. Value comes from judgment, it comes from knowing what matters, what is relevant, what is risky, what is missing, and the domain knowledge of the person using the tool in general. This is where human capability still matters enormously. So when we think about employability in an AI-rich world, I think four things students need. There are four things student needs. They need AI fluency. Yes, they need to be comfortable using these tools and understanding their strengths and limitations. But they also need domain judgment. They need to understand their subject well and fluently, whether that is business, law, education, marketing, or science. They need to understand it well enough to know when an AI output is shallow, misleading, or inappropriate. Then students need soft skills such as communication, because the ability to explain decisions, ask good questions, and work with other people becomes even more important when basic output generation becomes easier. And finally, they need ethics and trust. Employers do not just need people who can generate content quickly. They need people who can do so with responsibility, with awareness of privacy, bias, and accountability. So the message I would give to students is employability is not about proving that you can use AI. Plenty of people, many people can use AI. Employability is showing that you can use AI without losing the human qualities that make your work trustworthy and useful. That is a much stronger ambition, and it is also a much more future-proof one. So to close, I want to bring this back to one central idea. The real goal is not AI-free education. That is not realistic, and especially not with the direction technology is headed, and it does not reflect the world students already live in. The goal is a stronger human learning in an AI-rich university. That means students need more than warnings. They need guidance. They need examples. They need better habits. They need to understand not only what AI can do, but what they need to do themselves. It also means universities need to think carefully about what they are actually rewarding. If education only rewards polished end products, then there is a risk that students learn to optimize the appearance of competence rather than development of competence. But if learning design pays more attention to the reasoning, process, defense of ideas, and independent understanding, then AI can be incorporated in a way that still protects what matters. And I think the challenge that is the challenge in front of us, redesigning the education space so that we more properly examine the process and thought of learning. Interactive AI can support confidence, accessibility, and productivity. It can help students get unstuck, and it can open up new ways of practicing and learning. But it can also weaken skill development if students begin outsourcing too much of the process too early. So the question is not whether students will use AI, they already are. The question is to whether they will use it in a way that strengthens their education or in a way that only improves outputs and appearances. That is the difference between using AI as a learning aid and using it as a quiet substitute for learning itself. And that is why this conversation matters so much right now. Because the choices students make around AI today are not just convenience. It is shaping how they learn, how they're assessed, and how they're prepared for any kind of work they will enter post-university when they enter the workforce.
Thank you for watching. The Institute of Analytics is the global membership body for data professionals. Learn more by following us on LinkedIn, Facebook or Instagram, or visit our website now. The links are in the description.